Hey guys, welcome back to Catching Up with Cam. Today I wanted to talk to y'all about the NFL trade deadline. So one of the biggest moves of the day was Bradley Chubb to the Dolphins. He was traded for a first, a fourth-round pick, and Chase Edmonds. Ultimately, this is a really great deal. Chase Edmonds has underperformed for the Miami Dolphins. Fast, physical back. He's just not a good catcher out of the backfield. He's not a good receiving back. Another key move that the Dolphins made after giving up Chase Edmonds, obviously they had to find a running back 2 option because, Myles Gaskin just doesn't cut it. They got Jeff Wilson Jr. out of San Francisco, a back that's averaging 5.1 yards per carry this year, who's on pace for 900 yards, the same as Raheem Mostert. Ultimately, the Dolphins, I feel like they won the trade deadline. They made their team even more dangerous than it already was. The defensive pass rush should now be a lot better. Jalen Phillips on the left, Bradley Chubb on the right. I mean, it's just going to be an absolute terrifying defense, especially if the Dolphins secondary gets healthy. Another big trade, which was an interdivision trade with the Vikings and the Lions, with the Lions trading T.J. Hawkinson to the Vikings. Ultimately, I think the Vikings gave up a second-round pick, which is not bad. Lions are in full rebuild mode. They know they're not a great tight end away from winning a championship. They need other solid key pieces like a quarterback. So they're trying to find their QB of the future. They're trading for draft capital. I mean, so it makes sense. I feel like the Vikings definitely won that trade, but if you look at it from a rebuild standpoint, then the Lions did a good job, which probably would lead to them getting either Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud in the NFL draft next year. But anyways, T.J. Hawkinson to the Vikings. So that's really surprising, mainly just because it's an interdivision trade, so it's not really something that actually happens a lot. But, yeah, good move for the Vikings. Another move was cornerback William Jackson to the Steelers. So there was talks before the deadline, an hour before, that William Jackson was just going to be cut and released by the Commanders because there was just no good trades for him. He's had injury problems. He's got a big salary cap hit. I think it's $40.5 million. So ultimately, not a lot of people were wanting him. Ultimately, William Jackson, if he stays healthy, is one of the best corners in the league. He showed that the last 2 years, but he just has a problem staying fully healthy throughout a full season. But ultimately, at the end, the Steelers made a move to get him, and the Steelers got him. Another move was Chase Claypool to the Bears. So I know that the Bears and the Packers were both in on Chase Claypool, but ultimately the Bears decided to pull the trigger on him. They traded a second-round pick for Chase Claypool. Ultimately, I don't know if I would give a second-round pick for Chase Claypool just because he's only performed in 1 year. And then in the other 2 years, he's just kind of underperformed, been like a diva-type guy, calls himself top 5 in the league, but he doesn't perform. So as long as he turns it around, which I think he can do if he stays healthy, starts focusing more on football instead of celebrating when there's no time left, I think then he'll turn it around. But ultimately, good enough weapon for Justin Fields to keep growing as a passer. But yeah, so I don't necessarily like the move, but I think I think there's a very good chance that Chase Claypool could be as good as he was his rookie year with this Bears team. But ultimately, I feel like the Bears should have went O-line, not Chase Claypool. Another big move was Nyheim Hines to the Bills. So the Bills traded Zach Moss for Nyheim Hines and a second, I think. So ultimately that makes the Bills offense one of the most dangerous in the NFL, which it already was. It just makes it even better. Now they finally have a threat out of the backfield. Well, they had a rookie threat out of the backfield in James Cook, but now they have a proven threat. Like Nyheim Hines is dangerous when he touches the football. If they can get their run game going, then Nyheim Hines will even be a bigger part of this team. Another big one was Calvin Ridley to the Jaguars. So Calvin Ridley's still suspended for the rest of the year. But ultimately, I like this move. They're acquiring weapons for Trevor Lawrence. They did it in the offseason. They brought in Christian Kirk. The year before that, they brought in Marvin Jones Jr. So ultimately, I think the Jags offense will look really good next year. Right now, I think it's more of just a growing process for Trevor Lawrence. Because he's looked better than he did in his rookie year, which obviously his rookie year he really didn't have anybody. Marvin Jones Jr. was hurt all the time. DJ Chark was hurt. The only wide receiver he really had last year was Laviska Shenault, who now plays for the Carolina Panthers. But ultimately, I think Trevor Lawrence will be a better quarterback in year 3 with those weapons. But yeah, so moving on. Roquan Smith to the Ravens. So this one's a really good pick. Roquan Smith is a big, bruising linebacker who can play sideline to sideline. He can play pass coverage. He's a great run stopper. I mean, he does everything well. He's led the NFL in tackles the past 5 years. There's only, one guy who has more tackles than him in that amount of years, and it's Bobby Wagner. So, I mean, pretty good company for him to be in, and he's really young. Him next to Patrick Queen in the middle of that defense will help shore that up for sure. Ravens just got a lot scarier on the defensive side of the ball, along with Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Chuck Clark, Marcus Williams. I mean, that defense on paper, plus Calais Campbell, Patrick Queen, that defense on paper just looks astounding. Rashawn Fenton to the Falcons. So the Falcons secondary has been banged up in the recent weeks. Casey Hayward, I believe, is still out. AJ Terrell, I think he should come back this week, but I'm not too sure. So Rashad Fenton's a good move. It's an underrated move. He's an underrated corner in the NFL. He's your typical slot corner, though. So I think when Casey Hayward and AJ Terrell come back is when you'll see that trade benefit the most. Another one that happened before the trade deadline, which it happened earlier in the week, but it happened earlier last week, was Kadarius Toney to the Chiefs. I love this move. Kadarius Toney was being underused with the Giants. Not necessarily this year, but last year he was. This year he's been hurt. I think if he gets healthy and stays healthy the rest of the year, then he'll have a big role for the Chiefs and have a big rest of his second year. But ultimately, I like the move. Pairing him with Juju, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.D. McKissick, J.D. McKissick, Juju, and Mecole Hardman. I think that's a great wide receiver core, a great young wide receiver core. I think Chiefs are really looking dangerous. If they could shore up their defense, I think they should have went defense, probably like maybe an outside linebacker or another corner instead of trading one away. But that's just my opinion. But yeah, so that's all I have for the trade deadline. Now I'm going to give you all some of my NFL Week 9 picks. So one of the one kickoff game at 1 is the Dolphins at Bears. Ultimately, the Bears offense has looked really good in the past 2 weeks. They blew out the Patriots in Foxborough, which is something that's hard to do. They put up a good fight with the Cowboys, meaning their offense did. Their defense did not show up in that game at all. They allowed the Cowboys to put up almost 50 points of offense and almost, 500 yards? Yeah, so and their defense, they just gave away 2 key pieces. I think more of the same this week. I think the Dolphins beat the Bears 38-17. For the Dolphins to win this game, Tua's got to have another stellar performance like he did last week, where he was nearly perfect. The O-line's got to play better. The running game's got to get going against a porous Bears defense. It's just got to, especially with the new additions of Jeff Wilson. I think if we rush for over 100 yards and Tua throws for over 300 again, then the Dolphins will easily win by at least 14 or more. But I'm hoping that defense with newly acquired Bradley Chubb will show out this year or the rest of this year. I think Bradley Chubb makes a good impact, but not in the way of making sacks. I think it draws pressure to him, and it opens it up for Jalen Phillips to get to the quarterback more. And I think the Dolphins' defense needs to cause at least 2 turnovers to win. But my pick is Dolphins 38-17. Eagles-Texans, the Thursday night game. So ultimately, this is not a great game to talk about. undefeated Eagles versus the really, really, really porous Texans, who are beat up, beaten down. They're not good. They're a decent roster on paper. Their record, I think they're 5-1 now. So ultimately, the only thing going for them this game is they're at home. The Eagles' defense, too much for Davis Mills. I think the Eagles' defense causes at least 3 turnovers, and I think Jalen Hurts has another big day, and the Eagles win 35-14. Chargers-Falcons. So one of the surprising teams of this year is the Falcons. They're leading the NFC South, of course, because that division is really poor this year. The Saints are just beat up. They can't seem to get healthy for some reason, especially at quarterback and on defense. Marshawn Lattimore is still out. Jameis Winston's still out. Alvin Kamara did come back fully healthy, though, and scored 3 touchdowns last week. So that's an upside for Saints fans. That should give them hope. If he comes back fully healthy, plays again like that this week, and then you get Jameis Winston back very soon, and then Marshawn Lattimore, the other key defensive pieces, and you could end up getting Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry back this week as well. So, honestly, with that being said, if that happens, I think the Saints will win. Or I think the Saints will win their division. But right now, as it looks like, the Falcons could win their division. I think the Falcons beat the Chargers this week. Justin Herbert has looked really bad this year. Be it as it may, he may have a bad O-line this year due to injuries. He may not have his weapons. Tua's dealt with that his first 2 years in the league. Nobody gave him a pass. So I'm not going to give a Pro Bowl quarterback a pass. Because at the end of the day, if everybody thought Tua was supposed to be able to do it, then he should have been able to do it. But honestly, I like Justin Herbert, and I think he'll turn it around. I just don't think this is the game. I think this is the game where they fall to 500 versus the Falcons. I think the Falcons win 20-17. I think Marcus Mariota's trending in the right direction. That Falcons defense is still playing really good. They're playing lights out, even with their secondary being banged up. Granted, they kind of crumbled last week in the fourth quarter versus the Panthers, but again, it's the Falcons. That's what they do. But I like the Falcons to win 20-17. Panthers-Bengals. So honestly, Panthers, I don't know what they're doing at this point. I don't know if they're wanting to contend for the division or if they're wanting to start a fire sale. I don't know what they're trying to do. The Bengals' offense just looks non-existent without Jamar Chase. I didn't realize he was their entire offense until last week when they got beat up by a mediocre Browns team in Cleveland on Monday night primetime football. Joe Burrow threw 2 picks again. Ultimately, I think the Panthers win this one in a trap game. I think the Bengals are the better team easily. But I think Panthers prove once again that the Bengals offense is just 100 times better with Jamar Chase in it, and I think they win 24-21. I think P.J. Walker plays really good against the Bengals defense that has looked horrendous this year. I think Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman has another good day. I think he rushes for over 100 yards against a really horrible Bengals run defense. So I think Panthers win 24-21. Packers-Lions. So, honestly, this is a bit of a trap game again. Both of these teams have not looked good at all this year. I think that Aaron Rodgers will play better, mainly because the Lions' defense is just not good at all. But the Lions' offense is really good. Jared Goff's on a roll. Amon-Ra St. Brown's good. And DeAndre Swift's finally back fully healthy. Jamal Williams plays really good, especially out of the backfield. He's a really good back. I think they will lose something on offense without T.J. Hawkinson. Obviously, he was a top 5 tight end in the league. If not top 5, definitely top 10 tight end in the league. But ultimately, with that being said, I think the Packers continue their struggles, especially with Allen Lazard probably still going to be out. Randall Cobb still out. Justin Watson has a concussion. So I'm pretty sure he should be out this week. He may be back in time, but that depends on if he clears the concussion protocol. But with that being said, I think the Lions win 38-28. Raiders Jags. So the Raiders got shut out last week for the first time in 125 games, and in the last 125 games in their franchise. Ultimately, I think the Raiders play really bad again. I think the thing that helps this Jags team is the fact that it's in Jacksonville. I think that Jacksonville defense, which has looked really good at times but also really bad, I think they play really good versus Devontae Adams. I think they hold the Raiders to maybe 7 or 10 points, but ultimately I think the Jags and Trevor Lawrence get it done. I think they win 24-10. Colts Patriots. So this one's a tough one for me. Obviously, I'm a Dolphins fan, so it's kind of hard to pick the Patriots. But the Patriots have looked decent their past 3 games. Well, 2 out of their past 3 games, other than getting blown out by the Bears at home. Last week, they looked really good defensively versus a good Jets team. They forced Zach Wilson to throw 3 interceptions, which granted, Bill Belichick versus young quarterbacks, we all know how that goes, except for against Tua Tagovailoa, who is 4-0 versus Bill Belichick. Actually, 5-0 versus Bill Belichick now, after the first game this year. But ultimately, I think Sam Ehlinger goes into Foxborough, and I think they get it done. Michael Pittman, T.Y. Hilton, I think Jonathan Taylor also comes back, and Deion Jackson. I think they both just have a good game. Patriots' run defense is not that great this year. I think the Colts win 24-17. It's a tough pick because you never know what that Colts team is going to look like. Last week, they played really good. On defense, their offense did not really show up against the Commanders' defense. But ultimately, I think Colts win. Just because I don't know who's going to be starting this week, whether it's going to be Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones, but I don't think either one of them are going to beat that Colts defense. I really just don't, depending on how they show up this week. Bills at Jets. So this one's in Buffalo. The Jets defense will keep them in this game for the first half, but I think the Bills pull away. I think Josh Allen goes for over 500 yards again, or over 400 yards. I think Devin Singletary gets it going a little bit. Nyheim Hines shows what he can do in the run game and the passing game. But I think Bills win this one 38-17. I think that defense that's starting to get back healthy again, I think they cause Zach Wilson to throw 2 interceptions. Yeah, 2 interceptions. But I think they win 38-17. Vikings at Commanders. So the Vikings are sitting at 6-1 this week, or at this season right now, halfway through, and the Commanders are 4-4. But ultimately, with Taylor Heineke, they look amazing. He just provides a certain spark on that offense. That defense has looked really good in the past 3 weeks. So I think the Commanders are going to play good once again, and I think they beat the Vikings in a trap game, 27-20. Next game is Seahawks-Cardinals. Geno Smith, who would have thought, has turned into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this year. Kyler Murray, not so much, especially with Modern Warfare 2 dropping. His numbers are going to fall, and he's 0-1 since that happened. I know that's like a coincidence, but I honestly think that the Seahawks offense, too much for the Cardinals. I think it'll be a close game, but I think Geno has another good game. I think Tyler Lockett goes off and Kenneth Walker go off, but I think the Seahawks win 34-27. So the next game is Titans-Chiefs. Honestly, Titans are looking really good. They've won 5 in a row. They're 5-2 now. The Chiefs are 6-2. No, they're 5-2. Yeah, they're 5-2. Ultimately, the Chiefs' losses are to the Colts and the Bills. The Colts was by 1, and the Chiefs were by 4. So ultimately, I think that the Chiefs are a really good team. Obviously, right now they're the second best AFC team. But honestly, I think they're too much for the Titans defense to handle. I think the Titans played good for the first half, but then I think the Chiefs just come out and blow them out in the second. Well, they open the game up, not necessarily blow them out. But I think the Chiefs win 34-20. I think Patrick Mahomes has a really good game. I think the new addition of Kadarius Toney shows up this week, which is late in the fourth quarter. So I think the Chiefs win 34-20. The Monday night game, the Ravens at the Saints. Ultimately, I think the Saints played really good last week, showed that their defense is really good still. They're just really banged up. I don't think the Ravens have as many offensive weapons like the Raiders do. So that's a plus for the Saints defense, who's finally starting to get a little bit healthier back. I think Lamar still has a good game. I think that that Ravens defense looks a lot better, but ultimately I think the Saints win 24-20. I think Taysom Hill has another good running game. I think Andy Dalton plays good again this week, but I think that Saints defense comes up late with a turnover forced by Lamar Jackson. So I'm going to go with the Saints at home, 24-20 on Monday Night Football. Next thing I wanted to talk about was college football week 9 review. Ohio State at Penn State. So Ohio State let Penn State and keep in this game for a long time until the fourth quarter when Ohio State just put it away. Penn State should have won this game. They lost this game. Ohio State did not win. Ohio State just took advantage of poor offense by Penn State. Sean Clifford played really horribly. Ohio State's offense didn't do good really until the fourth quarter where they scored 28 points. So ultimately, Penn State should have won this game, but congrats to Ohio State for finding a way to win. Oklahoma State at Kansas State review. Never could have saw this coming. Kansas State, it's in Manhattan in Kansas. I think that was the really deciding factor. Spencer Sanders didn't play horrible, but he definitely did not play good. That Kansas State defense showed up and showed out after losing to TCU the week prior, and they won 48-0 with their backup quarterback. Wake Forest at Louisville. I don't think anyone could have saw this coming. Louisville beats Wake Forest at home, 48-21. So Wake Forest was up 14-0, and then Louisville storms back, forces 3 turnovers in the third quarter, and then just blows them out of the water the rest of the game. But, yeah, good win for Louisville. Bad, horrible loss for Wake Forest. Next game is UK versus Tennessee. So I expected this one to be a lot closer of a matchup than it was. Ultimately, Tennessee got the W, 44-6. I think what made this the most impressive game is that they played an all-around football game this time. They made Will Levis throw 2 or 3 picks. Their offense showed out like they always do against a great Kentucky defense. I mean, so that shows this next week when they play versus Georgia is going to be a really good game. But hats off to Tennessee. Ole Miss versus Texas A&M. So this one's not like a really hyped matchup that happened last week, but to me it is. I'm an Alabama fan, and as you know, Jimbo Fisher was running his mouth about Nick Saban, but he also called out Lane Kiffin, and that's what made this game so much fun to watch. Lane Kiffin does not like Jimbo Fisher, and in fact called out Jimbo Fisher even after they beat Jimbo Fisher on his home field in his post-game presser. So that's really cool to me. I like that Lane Kiffin was standing up for himself and for Nick Saban, who his boss was. So ultimately, I feel like that was a great game. Week 10 matchups. One of the biggest games is Bama at LSU at 7 o'clock kickoff time. Ultimately, I think Jaden Daniels keeps LSU in the game for the first half. I think Bama's offense and defense comes alive in the second half. I think Bryce Young plays another great game in his first true road test. Well, his second true road test as a quarterback. I think he really plays very well this week. I think Alabama puts to rest that they don't play good on the road. They do play good, they just haven't won. Statistically, over the past few years, every one of their losses have been on the road. Texas A&M, obviously you saw what happened when we played them at home. They don't beat us. Tennessee, they beat us. It wasn't because they were at home. They were just the better offense that day. They played better and they won. But Bama versus LSU, I don't think LSU's offense has enough to keep up with Bama's offense. So I think Bama wins 41-24. The biggest game of the week is Tennessee at UGA, which is a 3:30 kickoff time, and it is the college game day game of the week. Ultimately, I think Hendon Hooker does really good this game. I think he passes for over 400 yards again. Ultimately, I think Stetson Bennett plays horrible. I think he shows everybody that he should not be starting for the Georgia Bulldogs. Everybody talks about him like he should be a Heisman pick. The dude threw 5 touchdowns in the first game of the year, and then since then he's thrown 4. So, not a very good stat-wise after that. So, yeah. But I think Tennessee gets it done in Georgia. The first time they've beaten them since 2016. I think they win 45-24. Texas at Kansas State. So this one's not like a matchup that really matters except for Big 12 standings. I think Texas wins this one. Quinn Ewers. I think they win 44-34. High-scoring matchup, but I think Kansas State's offense doesn't have enough to keep up without Adrian Martinez versus Texas. Wake Forest and NC State. So after last week, this game is really not that big of a game. But I think Wake Forest's offense is still good enough to get the job done versus NC State. I think they win in a shootout, 45-38. Clemson at Notre Dame. So this one's not really a big game. It was scheduled to be one at the beginning of the year. Clemson's looked overrated at times this year. Should have already lost to Syracuse. Definitely should have lost to Wake Forest. So they've gotten lucky in 2 games. I think their luck runs out with the Irish beating them 31-21. So another thing I wanted to talk about was the college football playoff rankings, the first ones this year. So I'm going to run you through the list. Number 1, Tennessee. Number 2, Ohio State. 3, Georgia. 4, Clemson. 5, Michigan. 6, Bama. 7, TCU. 8, Oregon. 9, USC. 10, LSU. 11, Ole Miss. 12, UCLA. 13, Kansas State. 14, Utah. 15, Penn State. 16, Illinois. 17, North Carolina. 18, Oklahoma State. 19, Tulane, which that's a shocker there. 20, Syracuse. 21, Wake Forest. 22, NC State. 23, Oregon State. Number 24, Texas. Number 25, UCF. So the main issue I have with these rankings, I do not believe that Clemson should be ahead of Michigan. I also do not believe that Clemson should be ahead of TCU, nor do I believe Bama should be ahead of TCU, just because of the fact that TCU is undefeated. I am a Bama fan, but that does not mean anything. I think that if we played TCU, we would beat them. But I think record-wise right now, they have more impressive wins just because they've played against better offenses. They don't have... Okay, so the teams they've played are more impressive, but they don't have really impressive wins. I think that's what held them back because they're not blowing people out. They're not beating them badly. They're playing like one-score games every week. I think that's what held them under Bama. Plus the Big 12, there's no other team without 2 or more losses in the Big 12. So I think that's the other issue in the Big 12. They don't have any good competition, really. That's going to be like playoff caliber teams, and I think that's what's holding them back as well. But with that being said, as a Bama fan, I think Michigan should be at 4, TCU at 5, Bama at 6, Clemson at 7, solely because they should not be undefeated. In 2 games this year, they've looked really, really bad and got lucky each time. But if they stay undefeated, they're going to make it. I also do not think LSU should be ranked that high. I think they should be maybe 15 at most. I don't think Ole Miss should be that high either after getting the crap beat out of them by LSU. I just don't think so. I think I'd put a team like Penn State or Illinois above LSU or Ole Miss, just simply because Illinois only has, 1 loss on the year? Penn State has 2, but they've lost to 2 undefeated teams. They lost to Ohio State, which they should have won, but they screwed themselves in the fourth quarter. Michigan, where they just got obliterated. So they looked good versus one of those teams, which is in interconference competition. I think they should be ahead of LSU. LSU has 2 losses, one by 1 point, so they should have beaten Florida State, obviously. But they should not have lost to... They just shouldn't have lost 2 games, and I think that's the big issue. They shouldn't have lost to FSU, but they got blown out at home in Death Valley at noon by Tennessee. They got beat 40-13. I just don't think they're one of the top 10 teams in the country. That's just one of my many opinions. I would put them at 15. That's as high as I'm going with them right now. Now, if they play good versus Alabama, then okay, then you could put them in top 10. But right now, I would put them at maybe 15 or 14. I don't think they're better than UCLA. I don't think they're better than Ole Miss. Well, let me rephrase that. They're better than Ole Miss, but it's Ole Miss. I don't think they're better than Illinois. And I don't think they're better than Kansas State. I don't think they're better than Utah. I don't think they're better than Penn State. Those are just things that I think the committee should look back at. But ultimately, there's just a few tweaks I would make in this with the new rankings. But that's really it. And that's all I have for to talk to you guys about today. Just like it says in my channel, if any of you guys are struggling with anything, comment what you're struggling with, and I'll pray for you. This is a Christian-based channel, so anytime anyone has a prayer request, just comment on my videos. I'll see it, and as soon as I do, I'll pray for you. No matter what it is, you don't have to say what it is. Just tell me that you're struggling with something and that you need prayer, and I'll pray for you. But anyways, guys, y'all have a good rest of your day.